In 1900, the first Pan-African Congress is held in London, and it is led by a barrister or lawyer by the name of Sylvester Williams, a man from Trinidad. And it is this conference that launches the Pan-African movement and enters into the global and African vocabulary for the first time, the word Pan-African. And it's from then on that we hear this reference of Pan-African, meaning one Africa, the unification of Africa, and the unification of African people around the world in support of Africa and in support of their own freedom. And so this is the beginning of the emergence of this Pan-African movement that comes in the form of the Pan-African Congress. Those who attend in London came mainly from the Caribbean and from the United States. But what it indicates is that the mentality of the African in the US and the Caribbean that saw Africa as one is beginning to become a global political concept. It was always spiritual and political under Ethiopianism. It now becomes a global political concept suited for a world in which power is global, suited for a world in which the European views themselves as lords and masters of the world, and the only thing they will understand is a greater master, those who wield power to fight them. Now, I should say, there was a forerunner of this new power rising in the world that occurs in the beginning of the 20th century in the Russo-Japanese War. And the Japanese are able to defeat the Russians in naval warfare. They're able to build up ships and stuff that defeats the Russians. It is a sign that the shift of global power is going to have a lot to do with not only the concept of unity and power, in this case through Pan-Africanism, but through techniques, that is through gunpowder, through ships, through cannon, and through other forms of warfare. Gunpowder, officially invented in China, though used in Egypt for ceremonial purposes and by the Moors in Spain, but formally put into the military system of the West. And so this shift is also a sign that shift of power is going to go from west to east, including Africa, because the techniques that the European had monopolized, that is gunpowder, Gatling guns, which were the old machine gun, that gave them superiority even when they were outnumbered, that was now shifting to the east, to Africa, to Asia, and a little island called Cuba, a few miles off the shores of the United States. So these are forerunners of it. But the key thing is that the creative African in the United States, the African in the Caribbean, had the broader vision to see that Africa's future lied in unity, and brought that idea from the Caribbean and from the United States to Africa. And the first Pan-African Congress is the beginning of that. Now, I want to say this. You now have a European Union, and that European Union has got real trouble. You got Brexit, where the British are breaking out, and you've got all kinds of problems. But what brought the Europeans to a European Union was 2 world wars where they nearly committed genocide on each other. It is George Kennan, one of the wise foreign policy thinkers of this country, said, one more world war and the Europeans will ethnically wipe themselves out. They'll commit ethnic genocide. And so the reason that you see a European Union is not because Europeans love each other. That's what Brexit is telling you. They don't. They've been fighting wars against each other forever. But they came together to check Germany, to prevent Germany from breaking loose again, and maybe this time winning. But in checking Germany, Germany became in charge of the European Union, and the British don't like it and a lot of others, but more important, global capitalism is in charge. And so we've seen that the European Union was not formulated based on Europeans loving each other. It was formed based on the necessity of survival. Pan Africanism grows out of love. The African in America, the African in the Caribbean, the African in Africa that embraced this, embraced it out of the love for their people, the love of Africa, the love of African people wherever they are in the world. John Henry Clark, who gained this inspiration to become a scholarly warrior for Africa, gained it from his grandmother, who taught him one story over and over and over again about her husband, Buck, who was a strong African who fought against slavery. And it was that message that he got that inspired him to pursue Africa as his dream as a scholar. It gave him a sense of purpose. That was his form of Ethiopia. It was his love of Africa. You hear me? And Pan-Africanism stands on that. I made this statement a long time ago on one of my shows that Asa Hilliard sent me an article years ago on Pan-Africanism and Zionism. And it was also comparing Garveyism to Zionism, but it was generally the Pan-African movement. Garvey was a central example. It was a Jewish author, and they were making the argument that Garveyism, or this movement for African independence through the Universal Negro Improvement Association, and generally the movement for Pan-Africanism for African unity, was stronger than Zionism. And the point he was making was that Zionism is strong largely because it is financed by Western powers. And without the Western power backing, both financially and militarily and economically and financially, Israel wouldn't be able to stand one day where they are, you know, dispossessing the Palestinian people, standing amidst a neighborhood made up of people that really don't want them there as conquerors. But the African idea, the one that launched the Garvey movement, the one that launched the Pan-African movement, wasn't dependent upon and didn't get any financial support from the Europeans. It was based on the belief of the need for the unity of Africa and the love of African people. And it is that love that really drives this project, would drive a Kwame Nkrumah to go back to Africa and build up a new African state, inspired by Garveyism and by what he learned about Pan-Africanism in this experience when he was in the United States, engaging in study groups with John Henry Clark and going to Lincoln University, a Black university, which, by the way, Julian Bond, one of the leaders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee's father, was president of. So the first Pan-African Congress is the launching pad for this idea, this political idea of one Africa, coming from the Caribbean and the United States. And it's interesting that the first Congress is called by a man from Trinidad. And a prominent participant is a man called W.B. Du Bois, African-American, African-Caribbean. And by the fifth Pan-African Congress, this is something that is being embraced by the masses of Africans, as well as the intellectuals and leaders. So the Pan-African Congress called in London was called July 23rd through 25th, 1900. And Henry Sylvester Williams was a person that calls for this Congress. This Congress was not calling for independence. These Africans were now talking about protest. It was more reform. But what was important about this Congress was it was collaboration. It was Africans putting their heads together from different parts of the world, particularly the Caribbean, United States, and a few from Africa, to begin to share ideas that Du Bois would carry on through his Pan-African Congresses later, and that Garvey would carry on and carry to a very high point through his movement, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, where his central inspiration continued to be Ethiopianism. He never used the term Pan-Africanism, mainly because Garvey had used it, but he was the operational Pan-Africanist of this part of the 20th century, because he put on the ground the largest mass movement calling for not reforms, but the independence of Africa, and supporting the call for African unity. Martin R. Delaney, the great thinker of the 19th century, called for Africa for the Africans. And then Garvey would pick that up and call for Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad. And so this call for political independence comes to full birth in the Fifth Pan-African Congress, in Africans from Africa, the Caribbean, the United States coming together and making this call, but plotting the independence of Africa. And as Dr. Leonard Jeffries pointed out last week, Kwame Nkrumah would go back to Ghana and launch the independence movement there. And the rest of Africa would explode. All of them with the ghost of Garvey hanging over, the whirlwind of Garvey that he had promised and prophesied. But all of it coming from the womb of Ethiopianism that then blossoms into this idea of Pan-Africa, or one Africa, or all Africa. And now, of course, some have called it, as Nkrumah did, the United States of Africa. And I would stress, one that's under a just system. And that won't be easy, that will be hard. But if we're to have power in the world, then Africa's power must unite. It will take time for that to happen. It will face great opposition, as it already has. As we pointed out last week, Nkrumah tried to start this with the Organization of African Unity, now the African Union. So this is a process. This will take time. Our continent, the African continent, suffered more attack than any other continent or people through slavery and colonialism. And so to overcome this, is we have to overcome the legacies of oppression we face here and in the Caribbean. And for those of our people who are in South America, this won't be easy, but it takes vision. As you think, so you are. And while we fight here for our battles for liberation, it's in connection with our brothers and sisters throughout the world. And what we do to liberate Africans inspire other people as well to raise up their efforts to liberate themselves.